Linda. Thank you, Gabrielle. I think that's a great introduction to some of the issues we'll be discussing today. It's also a good introduction to some of our speakers. I noticed a number of the people who will be on the panels today were also featured in interviews there. So they're going to be giving us some more information and some more of their thinking on these issues. A number of the speakers in this did mention about the importance of framing of issues, and our first speaker of the day is going to introduce us to an alternative way of framing issues around the human security framework. So it's my enormous pleasure to introduce Malika Joseph. Malika is the Executive Director of the Regional Centre for Strategic Studies, RCSS. She's worked on various issues relating to South Asian security. She specialises on security sector reform and is one of the experts inducted into the UN roster of SSR experts. She's also worked with the International Security Sector Advisory Team, ISAT, of the Geneva Centre for the Democratic Control of Armed Forces, and she has a PhD in International Relations and has co-authored 3 books covering topics from small arms, South Asian regional security to landmines. So a woman with very wide experience, and it's my great pleasure to hand over to her.
Thank you, Jenny. And I think it's my privilege to be here among friends and others who are continuing to work on human security, who are knowledgeable about it, and also try to put it within their own regular work, how they've tried to mainstream human security framework in their work. So I don't want to be seen like as preaching to the choir here. So what I'm going to do is only flag some of the important reasons why a human security framework is best suited for countering extremism. So that's all I'm trying to do here in the next couple of minutes. For GPPAC, the Human Security Framework provides an important entry point for addressing and improving the effectiveness of post-conflict peace building, state rebuilding, and conflict prevention, and strengthening the role of CSOs in this process. So what do we mean by this? So let me just deconstruct this a bit. Why states should adopt a human security framework? Because essentially a state-centric framework has not worked until now. A state-centric narrative has resulted in polarizing and has demonized any community of people who are seen to have threatened the nation's sovereignty. So it's always a thing of us versus them. Faulty calculus in identifying the nature and, more importantly, the cause of the problem. Because when a state is threatened, all it sees is a threat to its sovereignty, a threat to its territoriality. They don't understand the underlying causes that would actually trigger such opposition to the government. And because the root causes have not been totally identified, the solution therefore has been only partial. And the main source of the problem continues to exist even after the state thinks it has addressed the superficial problems that it identified. And in this framework, the state becomes the principal and probably the only actor in conflict mitigation, a situation where it is the state versus the rest. So it is either you're with us or you're against us. So it doesn't give any space for any other actor to come in to engage, to try and help reduce the conflict. So these I would flag are some of the main issues or problems with the state-centric perspective. In contrast, what do we get if we are using a human security framework? The framework of analysis helps in identifying the myriad factors responsible for the conflict. So it's just not about challenging the sovereignty of the state, but also tries to look at some of the root causes why people feel disappointed in the government, people feel disenfranchised. So it tries to capture the dissatisfaction that prevails among a wider section of the people itself. And more importantly, what it does is identifies the complex interconnectedness that exists between these various factors. So it's just not one community which has a problem, but a community which has a problem vis-a-vis others, or maybe it is to do with resource sharing. So it kind of brings in a whole of interconnected factors which the state needs to look at. And it also provides an inclusive platform where a range of stakeholders can be consulted and engage, because right now when you identify a whole range of stakeholders who are part of the problem, it's possible that you can engage all of them to be part of the solution. And more importantly, it provides a space for civil society to engage proactively and positively to impact the outcome of the problem, which was not the case in a state-centric framework earlier. And one other advantage which I see from this framework is that while the state security framework is reactive, they are able to react only after the problem has surfaced, the human security framework is able to identify some of the rising discontent which is there among the people much before. So it is able to identify issues and prevent the conflict from actually breaking out into violence. So there is a way in which proactively it helps in preventing conflict itself. A modern state in an emerging post-modern state narrative cannot afford to employ the same counterterrorism mechanisms that it's been employing all along. One, it hasn't worked. And secondly, we are living in a time and space where simple military offensive and a narrative is simply not acceptable to the world at all. So it's fundamental why the change needs to change its strategy. And every instance where you've had a human security deficit, the state has not diagnosed it properly, and it has given a state-centric response to it. And what has happened is what essentially was a human security deficit turns into a human insecurity. And that becomes, eventually when it's manifests itself in a lot of violence, it becomes a deficit of state security, which leads to state insecurity and eventually state failure. So if you could address the human security deficit which happens in the beginning, you could actually prevent from the state collapsing at a much later stage. Finally, the state needs to be secure, its citizens need to be secure. If its counterterrorism strategy needs to be successful, it needs to be broad-based and engage a wide spectrum of people. And for that, the human security framework is the only way forward, and that's the way I see it. Currently, there continues to exist a gap between the concept of human security and how it is translated into practice. And I think this is exactly where there is a space for civil society to engage proactively and fill this gap. So I'll stop here, and I look forward to learning from all of you today. And we think we now have another short video on which we will learn about how people, from a people perspective, what do they think about human security? What do they feel?